I really like when writers and storytellers introduce unrelated concepts to what the main focus of the story is, just as a means to build up what the general world is about or will contain. During the Yorknew City arc, Hunter x Hunter introduces this pretty interesting idea that stuck with me even throughout the main focus of Hunter x Hunter, introducing arguably more interesting and fleshed out concepts. In chapter 85 of the manga, after Gon, Killua, and Leorio finally meet up again after the Hunter exam arc, while poking through a silent auction bazaar, Gon senses this sort of Nen signature from a knife that's just sitting around in front of a vendor. Killua identifies the knife as a Ben's knife. Killua explains that the strange knife they found belonged to a serial killer from 100 years ago named Benny DeLon. What we know about Benny DeLon pretty much only comes down to the little blurbs that are shared immediately after Killua mentions this. They read, "A swordsmith by trade, he forged a numbered knife each time he killed someone, as a memento. He made 288 in all. He put the knives up for sale in his storefront with his regular swords and knives. In prison, he was said to have explained, 'Each of my victims' screams and facial expressions inspired my work. He had a cult following, even in his day.'" What's most interesting to me about the Ben's knives, especially considering that Killua remarks that his father likes the knives, it's that despite knowing that there are 288 of these knives out in the world, we only ever actually see 2 of them throughout the series, and both are only seen within the Yorknew City arc. It's like these knives and the guy that made them are so infamous that people know about them and the reasons why they were made and seek them out for that reason, but they're not common enough within the circles that we see explored within Hunter x Hunter's narrative to where we'll see more than the initial 2 that we do. As the blurb mentions, the gimmick with these knives is that there are 288 different ones, and each knife is designed differently based off of the killing that Benny DeLon conducted before he made them. When Silva and Zeno Zoldyck go to fight Crollo in chapter 98 of the Yorknew City arc, Silva gets scratched by a knife that Crollo is using, and he correctly identifies that it is a mid-era Ben's knife. He then goes on to state that the knife is poisonous. This sort of tells us more about the Ben's knives and the kind of variety that we could see if we were aware of what the full set was like. Because while the knife we see with Gon, Killua, and Leorio is just a knife that radiates some aura, the Ben's knife that Crollo brings into his fight with Silva and Zeno is poison, which is unlike any other knife we've seen in the series thus far, including the other Ben's knife that we do see. And even if the poisonous effect that we see with this Ben's knife wasn't actually exclusive to that knife, surely Ben DeLon did not poison all 288 of his knives. So, to me at least, this sort of implies the idea that the other Ben's knives would have other sort of differences or effects to them. I mean, don't get me wrong, it wouldn't be an out of the question thing to assume that there are multiple poison knives, but maybe one knife is covered in like a neurotoxin, and the other knife is covered in like a snake venom. What stands out most about the Ben's knives isn't necessarily the fact that they were individually made and based off of the killings that came before them, but rather the fact that they radiate aura, because Benny DeLon was not a Nen user. Killua mentions, after finding the knife with Gon Leorio, that talented people in any field often use Nen without knowing it. We see this demonstrated throughout the Chimera Ant arc with a character named Komugi. Komugi is the worldwide acknowledged best player of a game called Gungi, which is very similar to chess. The entire main conflict of the Chimera Ant arc arguably hinges on the fact that Meruem, a Chimera Ant who seems to be approaching perfection, cannot beat this young girl in a game that he is rapidly becoming obsessed with. His philosophy of might makes right and survival of the fittest starts to fall apart when met with a girl who is very strength-wise weak, but in some areas is better than Meruem ever will be. At one point during the two's Gungi battles, Meruem asks Komugi to make a bet with him. He says that if Komugi wins against him, that he will give her anything she wants, but if she loses, he will take her left arm. Instead, Komugi offers her life on the table if she were to lose against Meruem, because due to her broader circumstances and a saying among Gungi players which states, A Gungi king is a mere mortal once he's lost. Komugi has thusly made a pact with herself to take her own life if she were to lose a game of Gungi. Her confidence in her own skills, the external pressure and feelings like she'll become a burden to her family that she's a breadwinner for if she were to lose even one game, and that saying all culminate in a situation where Komugi, despite being unaware of Nen, is able to tap into it and utilize it to improve her Gungi skills. Komugi is an example of what you would call a Nen genius. The term Nen genius is a little misleading. In fact, I know that the term genius is one of 4 classifications for inherent proficiency with Nen that Togashi shared with this updated Nen chart in an exhibition that was done like a year or 2 ago. But like the actual term of Nen genius to refer to somebody that unconsciously taps into Nen, I don't even believe actually exists, as far as at least the manga or the anime goes. Because it almost implies that these characters are starting off with something that other people just don't have, where in reality it's more like some people spend their whole lives preparing for a marathon, and some people are running that marathon without even knowing it. Komugi's specific needs and strengths within life, coupled with her personal vow to take her life if she were to lose a game of Gungi, probably ended up fanning the flames of the Nen that existed within her, but brought it to the surface even though she didn't consciously think to do that. Or at least that's how I personally contextualize the idea of some people being faster learners when it comes to picking up Nen. Like their prior life skills or experiences that they've had along the way taught them certain things they didn't know they would need, so when it comes to either learning Nen or unconsciously using it, they're already in a better off position than somebody who might be consciously trying to learn. Wing mentions in chapter 48 that very few people know of Nen, let alone know how to actually utilize it, and that those who do become known as geniuses, psychics, or superhumans. All ways you might try to describe why somebody seems to be built different when compared to others, but in actuality are just explanations for the differences in skill sets between somebody who unconsciously learns things and somebody who is going out of their way to learn them. In this way, even, it's less that somebody is born naturally proficient at Nen, and more their broader circumstances demand that they either become proficient with Nen consciously or unconsciously. Like a Gon learning how to sneak up on animals in his time on Whale Island, unknowingly teaching him how to close his aura nodes and utilize Zetsu. I can't act like the idea of Nen geniuses isn't at least a little confusing to me, but the basic idea that Togashi is getting across is incredibly interesting. Like the idea that people in real life we see as overly talented or born with the skills that they have actually got there through a form of supernatural unconscious enhancement of their greatest traits. Or not, I don't know. Please don't take this as gospel. I'm just talking about things that interest me. I don't have a full handle on the story. I didn't write it. Also, it's been like 8 or so months since I've actually sat down and engaged with the whole of Hunter x Hunter, so I'm running off of memory and research here. And at least as far as research goes, this concept is a little nebulous, but it does exist. Inexplicably, within the Hunter x Hunter universe, some people are just more attuned to identifying aura or controlling their aura, even though they have no idea what Nen actually is. Some people generate supernatural abilities that people would call talent, but in actuality are just extensions of their own skills supplemented by Nen. I'd like to imagine at least that aura as something passively generated by the body makes it equivalent to like a supernatural organ that everybody has. And even if you don't know your organs are there, your organs are functioning and doing work for you because that's just what they do. I am reminded, if anything, by an idea introduced in chapter 401 of Hunter x Hunter, when one of the bodyguards aboard the Black Whale 1 goes to Kurapika and mentions that they are a child of Beyond Netero. They also explain that they had their Nen awakened within them from birth. That makes sense. We know that you can force people's aura nodes awake by shocking them with aura, and their body sort of naturally responds to try and defend themselves. But what we didn't know before this is the idea that if a newborn has their Nen forcefully awakened, they will develop Tennen Zetsu on their own in order to be able to protect themselves, like an unconscious bodily response. What does this mean? Well, I kind of think that the idea of being a Nen genius is just as much being born with a different level of proficiency in Nen as someone else, as it is a unconscious sort of adaptation of one's aura based off of their own desires, needs, and life experiences. Irrespective of whether or not I understand the concepts at play to the level that Togashi expects, they interest me immensely all the same. I just think it's interesting how we have met characters like Komugi or seen the effects of characters like Benny Delone who were so proficient or so obsessed with their hyper specific craft that it manifested in Nen influencing it in some form. I love the idea that you can be walking through this marketplace as somebody that knows Nen and get this sort of pit in your stomach because there's this knife off to the side that is coated in aura due to the fact that the person that made the knife is a psychopath that unintentionally imbued it with the aura because he was just so passionate for his craft of killing people and making a knife based off of that killing. The concept of the Ben's knives and Benny Delone is ultimately kind of inconsequential in the whole of Hunter x Hunter. Like as I said before, we know there are 288 of the Ben's knives, but we only ever see two of them. We end up learning down the line in Greed Island that people can permanently or temporarily imbue their aura within objects to strengthen them or do something. So it's not even that we need the Ben's knives within the story to express this idea, or else it won't be gotten across at all. It's just cool, you know? I bet that's exactly what Togashi thought. An idea doesn't need to be story relevant to appear in the story, or let me rephrase that. An idea doesn't need to be the focal point or a major hinging part of how a narrative functions to be included within a story. Sometimes you just want to include something because you want to include something. The Ben's knives are one of my favorite under-elaborated on or generally mysterious concepts within Hunter x Hunter. It makes the world of Hunter x Hunter feel so much more alive and wonderful and wide just because the story isn't obligated to navigate and explore and present these ideas only as something along the main path, which gives the world itself and all the concepts on display time to breathe as if they were alive and with a mind of their own. I can't think of a more fitting idea to come from an author like Togashi, who very much makes what he wants to make not out of an obligation to tell stories, but because he is interested in all the facets of doing so, including all of those small ideas that come up across the duration of a story, but might not contribute towards the ending of it.